And joining us now with more on the nuclear talks and the explosion at Iran's main port is United States Colonel Rich Outzen from the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
So both sides, the United States and Iran, seem very committed to these nuclear talks. It's clear that the Islamic Republic of Iran is trying to get sanctions lifted after President Trump's maximum pressure campaign has essentially brought the regime to the brink. But the Ayatollahs are at their weakest point today. So why negotiate? Why give this regime a lifeline?
Well, I think that's exactly the time you want to negotiate with someone, because most people in a negotiation, if they are negotiating from a position of strength, have very little incentive to grant concessions. I think President Trump does not necessarily want regime change in Iran. He'd prefer a weakened regime that's willing to make concessions on the portfolios of greatest interest to the United States, like the nuclear proliferation issue. And now's the time to do it. I think Trump, as a negotiator and as a businessman, understands you put carrots and sticks on the table at the same time. Lifting of sanctions, sure, but at the same time, maximum pressure and potentially even military pressure against the Houthis and elsewhere, I think is actually a very effective negotiating strategy, and I think that's what you want to push for. When your enemy or your partner in negotiations, in this case, is at their weakest, that's when you press for the deal.
And what are some of the points of contention that remain that we know of today? And do you believe the Trump administration will allow Iran to keep some sort of basic nuclear program?
Well, I think so. I think the outlines of a deal have actually been known for some time. If you look back into the first Obama administration, before we got into the JCPOA business, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which really gave far too much leeway to the Iranians in terms of few restrictions and did absolutely nothing with their regional destabilizing behaviors. Before that JCPOA, there was a deal on the table that involved taking a certain enrichment grade of uranium to a third country and then making sure it got processed just right to the level for nuclear energy, but could not be enriched further to weapons grade. And I think something like that preserves the technical means for a peaceful nuclear program is probably the trade space, because that allows Iran to save face by saying, look, this is part of our energy portfolio. And of course, we never wanted nuclear weapons, which of course we don't believe. But I think if the pressure could yield that, I think that's probably what is on the table now, is what mechanism and what steps to get sanctions relief in exchange for very ironclad guarantees that there will be a turnoff from the ambiguous development that the Iranians have pursued that basically has left open the door to weapons development as well as energy development.
Mm-hmm. And there are reports that Russia has said it will build a nuclear reactor in Iran. This as talks to dismantle Iran's nuclear program are underway. I mean, what do you make of this?
The issue is that, coupled with ambiguous weapons development programs and with the regionally destabilizing approach strategically, which is what the Iranians have pursued, you can't trust that nuclear energy won't be turned into nefarious purposes. So I think that's the name of the game. If the Russians want to help after a deal that has ironclad guarantees that there'll be no weapons development, if they want to help with a nuclear energy plant for peaceful purposes, that's a separate issue, entirely separate issue. Now, of course, Russia has its own aggressive war going on in Ukraine. We're sanctioning them for that. So I'm not going to say that the United States would be okay with it. There's still going to be sanctions related to Ukraine war, but it's much less of a concern than the ambiguous program that we have currently that could lead to weaponization very quickly.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there. How do we know that Iran won't use its nuclear capabilities for nefarious purposes? I want to ask about this explosion in Iran's main port. I mean, it looks like simple negligence, but it's, no coincidence that this port also stores chemicals used for Iran's ballistic missiles program, according to multiple reports. I mean, what's your take on this explosion, and how is it going to affect the regime?
Well, my immediate thought was to remember the blast in Beirut. You remember a couple of years ago, something similar, where people said, how could this negligence occur? And then further forensic investigation led to the conclusion that actually this was part of Assad and Lebanese Hezbollah storing the explosive materials that were used in barrel bombs against the Syrian people. So this very negligent and nefarious mingling of civilian economy with military means and supplies that were being used against Assad's own people is what caused the explosion. I think here, could it be negligence? Sure. But is it also culpable on the part of the Iranian regime to have explosive material for missiles networked into the same place where they've got civilians living and working and the biggest civilian port that they've got? So yeah, this is part of the military capacity of Iran, part of their nefarious regional activities. It could just be negligence that led to the explosion, or it could be a message to help spur the negotiations. Without access to the classified materials, I'd have to go 50-50 on which one of those it was.
Absolutely. All right, Colonel Rich Outzen, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Good to see you. Thank you.